Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the virtual All Fashion Sourcing 2020. We're very excited to have Nicola Cooper addressing you today to talk about Menswear 2021. Just want to give you a quick intro to Nicola. She's the founder, trend researcher, analyst, cultural strategist for Nicola Cooper and Associates. She's an information junkie, teacher, a speaker, a brand consultant, and she really is a formidable presence on Africa's fashion and lifestyle landscape. Nicola, we've worked together for a while now, and I really enjoy listening to your talks. So very excited to hear what you've got to say about menswear trends for 2021. Over to you.
Awesome. So I'm just going to share my screen, guys. Thank you, everybody, and thank you to Neil. It's always an honor to speak to your audience. I think today we're just going to sort of get straight into it. As Neil mentioned, my name is Nicola Cooper and Associates, or at least that's my business name, and we have really unpacked some of the lifestyle trends that are going to be impacting fashion and many other facets of both just the wearability of fashion, but just also looking at the consumer purchasing patterns shifting as a result of COVID-19. So today I'm just going to sort of take you through, just to contextualize what are trends, the impact of COVID-19 on our industry, and of course the relevant lifestyle trends for 2021. For those of you who have maybe watched the women's wear trend reports, you may want to sort of skip ahead as a result, or just sort of hang tight because some of this information will be repeated, but I think what you'll see is how it's also being articulated into menswear. So I'm just going to sort of get straight in there and throw some solid information at you. So I think it's really important to understand that, myself as a business with Nicola Cooper and Associates has really been hammering this home for a good number of years, and the idea of fashion and fashion trends, it's far more than just what it looks like and how it sort of hangs within the visual spaces of the fashion industry. But I think it's about looking at the behaviors of your consumers, their beliefs, the occasion, geographical locations, and how that all takes into consideration what your consumer is in alignment to purchase. So it's no longer just sort of defined by traditional demographics. I think it's far more nuanced and complex than it is perceived to be, especially now where clothing and sloganism really gives cues into what people stand for and who they are. So also just looking at some of the sort of snapshots and the impact of COVID-19 on the fashion industry. So firstly, we see a rise of e-commerce and m-commerce, and for us on the African continent, m-commerce is really vital. We have one of the largest mobile media markets in the world, and when we look, an average South African has about 1 or 2 phones, and then when we start looking further into Africa with limited power sources and those kinds of things, some people have 2 to 3. So I think m-commerce is something that we really have to keep a focus on. It's how we connect with the African consumers. And I think as smartphones evolve and how it starts to just impact our lives, I think we're going to see more and more directives to m-commerce and engagement via mobile. Then, of course, the availability of sales platforms and distribution centers. This is also as a result of kind of the strain on retail and what that has meant for young designers. So now looking at spaces that will house and deliver your items rather than sitting in a retail space. Then, of course, the obvious shifts in fashion styles, shapes, and products. And then the alteration in media and media consumption. South South Africa lost a lot of sort of glossy magazines, and what that really has done, if you look at it from a positive perspective, is opened the space for content generators to take that audience. So I think those kinds of shifts, even though they come with sort of the cons, they do, if you look at it, there are great opportunities to find in those. Then, of course, the shift in manufacturing and the potential for local manufacturing for local and global markets. So as a result of COVID, many countries are relooking their manufacturing processes, as many of them focused on manufacturing within Asian countries. I think we're starting to realize the risk, and should another COVID-19 happen, a lot of companies are looking to sort of minimize the risks by sort of evenly distributing their manufacturing. And I think that's where Africa really comes into account, is that we have space, we have the skills, and when you look at the rand dollar or the rand pound or the rand euro exchange, it makes manufacturing on the continent really affordable. So I think a lot of that is going to happen, and a lot of those shifts and investments to other countries really holds great potential outside of the Asian countries that are still continuing with manufacturing. So then when we look at lifestyle and fashion trends that have been sort of impacted by COVID-19, you know, a lot of shifting has been around us, who we are, you know, the idea of wellness, comfortability, and also just looking after ourselves, which we really haven't been doing for a number of years. We've all been really fast tracking our lives, and what we're starting to see is the impact of COVID-19 hits a big pause on the world and our lives, and what you're starting to see is consumers looking at with a new perspective on their consumption habits, and they're really shifting to new priorities. So it's really important that we as an industry sort of take into account what this means to our consumer and how their shifts in purchasing are going to impact us. Then, of course, as you see me now in a virtual world, brought to you by All Fashion Sourcing, a lot of us have worked from home during this time, and some businesses may not revert to full-time in the office, rather relinquishing the control, or at least the costs around having to have employees within one sort of space. And this is really important when it comes to fashion for the digital realm. As you can see, you can only see me from the waist up, and that changes the dynamic on fashion. Is, you know, when you're only seeing this component, well, I mean, today I wore a very loud pattern to articulate this, is that to be able to stand out on screen, we are probably looking at, you know, really bold patterns, accessories. So those kinds of things are really going to impact design and purchasing, and this goes across sort of all those kinds of spaces. So then face masks, as you know, we all love to hate them, but they're really not going away anytime soon. When we look at the disposable face mask market size, we're looking at the US dollar amount of 74.90 billion in the first quarter of 2020. So, I mean, obviously this was a really strong sort of fluctuation as a result of it becoming a prerequisite. But I think we're not going to see it sort of diminishing as soon as we think it would. When we think about travel, going to foreign countries, visiting foreign countries, or being at group events, what we're starting to see is it's more and more going to become just a standard necessity that we pack as we're packing for an overseas trip. And that's also around the susceptibilities that we have to sort of airborne viruses or pollution that we are not potentially immune to. So I think we're going to see a lot of sort of shifting around the mask, and I think there's great opportunity there to see how we can sort of tailor this mask culture and make it a little bit more in the fashion space as an extension of your consumer's personality or self-expression. Then, of course, when we look at COVID-19 and the impact that it's had on us, I think we're so hyper aware of the fragilities and vulnerabilities of us as humans, as well as other humans, essential workers, really made us assess who is really at risk and how do we protect other people as well as ourselves. And this is translated quite dramatically into the fashion spaces, where we look at fabrication and it's not just what we consume, it's what we wear that really looks at it from a more holistic perspective. So a lot of that is going into new innovations within fabrication, such as CBD, compression recovery wear, heightened slumber. As you know, a lot of us battled to sleep during COVID. It was, a global phenomenon that we weren't sleeping well. So what we're starting to see is restorative fabrications, aided by, really comfortable items, soft silhouettes, the fabrication, and then also looking at weighted styles. And as you know, there's been quite a strong sort of influence of weighted blankets that prevent anxiety. Now we're seeing that being immersed into sleepwear as well. And then, of course, what we're referring to as bath leisure, from sort of this transitional from fitness to lounging around, to working out. How do you make something that's really comfortable, but also looks good, so you can pop to stores or anything like that in between? So that also has sort of shifted us into understanding, our impact on nature. As you know, when we were all sort of housebound, we saw our impact, and it was pretty undeniable. So what we're starting to see is that people are not only hyper aware of what's important to younger consumers like your Gen Z or your Gen Alpha, with drivers like Greta Thunberg, but also around people living a healthier idea of this kind of flexibility of clothing, where it can help you when you're walking and commuting to work, but also, something that is durable and of higher quality. So I think what's really important to start understanding is that there's a versatility that needs to come into play, as well as, the functionality of clothing. Also, when we look at outdoors wear, when we look at retail sales of sportswear and outdoor apparel, at 2018, it was valued at approximately $12.7 billion US, and it was forecasted to reach a value of $19.6 billion US by 2026. And I think, we're starting to see a steady growth within the outdoor apparel market. And I think what's quite interesting about this space is that it also transitions into streetwear. When we look at kind of the shift with brands like North Face or Dickies, that kind of workers wear and functionality and hardiness of clothing that can sort of translate to, I can wear it on the weekend, but I can also wear it to make a statement. So I think those lines are blurring, and those classifications are also blurring, which offers really sort of great scope for those who are predominantly sort of defined in the outdoor wear space, that now outdoor wear and functionality is something that is highly desirable within a fashion space. So I'm going to show you some of the sort of campaigns throughout this session, so you can see how this is articulating into spring-summer 2021 campaigns. So even around the visualization of that, you're starting to see how, in the marketing of it, there is this sort of pointedly approach to nature and placing clothing within a natural environment. But as I said, this is going into the very fabrication, not just the silhouette or even the stance that brands are taking. So we're starting to see that through breathable linen, outdoor repellent performance mesh, moisture winking fabrics, sustainably sourced cotton, recovery compression textiles for athletics wear, and CBD infused textiles. So I think there's an incredible amount of sort of scope that's happening as a result of, some of the trends which we saw moving in a smaller increment that has just been fast-tracked as a result of COVID-19. So the ideas of wellness and fitness, even though they were growing each year, have grown quite astronomically as a result of COVID-19. So things that were just sort of evolving have now sort of hit full speed ahead. Then, of course, when we're looking at lifestyle and fashion trends, a lot of people, are still confined to their homes, are still working from homes. And I think it's really important to understand that there's many sort of trends that have evolved as a result of that. So things like considered comfort, where you're looking at clothing that can sort of live seamlessly between lounging, living, work, rest, and also working on weekends or playing on weekends. So I think what we're starting to see is our homes in themselves have become sort of a multifaceted space, and our clothing will equally become that. Then, of course, the new cozy, and this is specifically around winter trends, but also, just that staying at home trend where wardrobe is really focused on things that make us feel cozy and protected and are both practical and stylish. So I think what we're starting to see is, really how clothing is transcending different spaces, and this is obviously offering some kind of challenges as well as opportunities for brands. And then when we look at the 2 mile suit, which was coined by WGSN, is this idea of clothing that is comfortable, that looks good on screen, but also you could, wear it to the office, but it's comfortable, it's fluid, it's soft, and it gives you the same feelings. And then what we refer to as the 2 mile slipper. So the idea of 2 mile and is it something that I can wear beyond 2 miles of my home? So I think we're starting to see a strong shift, even in the most sort of fashion heavy, towards sliders, slippers, as well as evolving the sort of athleisure and sneaker trends. So then also looking at versatility, this is really important, as most of us did do during quarantine. We cleared out our closets. We looked at how much we actually had that we didn't use. We were Marie Kondoing things. And I think that what we're starting to see is people want, but the durability and the versatility of it. So how can it transcend different sort of applications in my life? Because I think we're hyper aware of the stuff that we've consumed and how it's quite sort of claustrophobic to us being in our homes for this period of time. So I think this kind of awareness has brought around a definite consumer shift in terms of what they consume and how often. So also just to look sort of 5 years forward for 2025, the idea of brands prioritizing people and the planet over profitability. So these are sort of questions around sustainability, but also around, what we call the brand stand. If we're talking about Black Lives Matter, it's beyond just a black square on your Instagram. Do you have a diverse board? Are you empowering sort of previously disadvantaged? What does this mean? Because your consumers are not just looking at a product anymore. They're looking through the line and they're demanding it, as well as demanding transparency. And that just falls into the purposefulness and ethical business philosophy. And this is around, what is this doing for my community? Is it impacting my economy? Is it ethical? Are the people that are making my garments well looked after? Is it really important how much water it uses? So I think these are really, really interesting. But as a result, the luxury goods market, which we've seen growing year on year within the African continent, is starting to grow again globally. And that's the result of people buying luxury items because they want to buy less, so they're willing to pay a little bit more for things that are of a better quality, have a longer lifespan. And I think this is something that, even though it might not be affordable to all consumers, is actually trickling down into sort of fast fashion, affordable retail spaces. So you're seeing the demand for sustainability reaching spaces like Zara and H&M, and them really having to shift their model of fast fashion and really think about what they are doing to the world and what they are doing to the climate. So I think they're starting to see quite a dramatic shift in how sort of fast fashion and affordable retail spaces are engaging with that. Also looking at, consumers embracing creative artisanal values and genuine quality and durability of products, and this is also around the slowness. And as you know, COVID-19 sort of put the brakes on, and we all had to sort of pause whether we wanted to or not. And that really made us assess our lifestyles and, what that means, and what spending time with family and slower consumption means, and the value of this. And I think this is something that is a new awakening as a result of COVID. And when we speak about COVID, we're not just speaking about it in terms of, this is what's happening now. Some of the trends as a result of COVID-19 might dissipate and go back to the way that they were before, but a lot of trends are now forever changed. And I think that's something that a lot of businesses are battling with. How do they sort of shift priorities, shift product offering, and do so quickly as your consumers adapting and changing with this rollout of COVID? Then, of course, looking at what that means and what decadence means. So if we're buying less, then we want to buy better, but we also want to buy something that makes us feel good, it makes us feel safe, or it makes us or gives us some form of escapism, even though we're in an inescapable space. So the idea is, there is this kind of elevation of quality, whether it be in the fabrication or the treatment or the innovations in fabrication, but also on the silhouettes, where we're looking at really oversized items that give us an almost cocoon to make us feel like we are protected. And then obviously, when gyms closed down, we had to keep fit somehow. And of course, interest for indoor workouts just spiked on Google Trends. And what we saw as a result of this is, how home workouts and functionality, and also being able to go from working out at home and pop onto a Zoom meeting, all of these things are so integrated now that I think we really have to look at this more as a holistic wellness perspective, rather than, you know, wellness being segregated to just food or just exercise, filtered into every facet of our consumer's life. And then also, as I mentioned earlier, you know, our industry specifically has been dramatically impacted by COVID-19. And we're seeing not only businesses be hyper aware of what this means to their industry at large, but also around activism and you know, ethical working spaces, having representation, all of these kinds of facets come into account. And I think the way that we've pictured sustainability is, you know, on the fabrication and manufacturing side, but I think it goes beyond sustainability, especially in countries that are inevitably going to hit some form of recession, is that our consumers in South Africa have started looking at smaller businesses and designers and smaller brands so that they can purchase, so that there is economical stability that we're feeding back into our own economy to support our economy and to support local business. So I think sustainability isn't just what this is going to have in terms of environmental impact, but also what it's going to have on an economical impact and how we can support our local industries and our local economy. So I think this is really important to take into consideration, as this offers great opportunity to smaller unknown brands in a number of countries, or all the countries that people want to invest with, because they know and they've seen the humanization behind these brands. So then also, this brings about localization and the importance of localization. And this is not only in, you know, the products that we are making, but also the representation in fashion, advertising, and media, that we're taking into consideration that, you know, South Africa is not London, New York, or Paris, and we all have these definitive sort of nuances that make our countries, and that we can't just have this kind of copy and paste approach. We have to take into consideration the cultural sensitivities and nuances and delicacies, the gender nuances, and all of these kinds of facets that we kind of just sort of brushed past in the past. And I think this is something, because this is what we do with Nicola Cooper and Associates, it is our area of expertise. But what we're starting to see is it's not only in diverse countries like Africa, but also in established countries like America or United Kingdom, where people are demanding to be represented in all their diversities, whether it is in gender or race or language. And I think this is really important. And what I see is the Americanized or Westernized countries really having something to gain by looking at diverse countries like South Africa and seeing how they manage the space to give a nod to the intricacies and delicacies around culture and race and gender and all of those kinds of facets. So this is a video by Richard Nisi. Rich is a well-known South African fashion designer. This was recently shot in the Transkei in the Eastern Cape in Southern Africa, ironically where I grew up. And I think there's a beautiful homage to, you know, what it's like to see fashion in a localized context here. And I think that's really important. It's not only a local designer creating his own localized prints, but also when he's generating the content, we see things that we are familiar with in the background and in the advertising. So also when we look at, you know, this kind of stay-at-home style and what that means, it really is around adaptability and understanding that your consumer is very busy trying to navigate homeschooling and trying to work out and trying to cook and all of these kinds of facets simultaneously working. And I think we have to take into consideration that, one, our consumers don't have a lot of time. So how do we help them save time, and how do we help them slimline their lives to make it more easier? And then, you know, what we're starting to see as a result from this is kind of a back to basics approach, and how that's regaining the spotlight. You know, this is also around the shifting in men's spending habits that have accelerated for loungewear categories, working from home. Obviously, we want things that are diverse, that we can run errands, but we can also have on-screen communications with. And then, of course, indoor fitness, and then comfortability, and really looking at what this means. And as you can see here, this is Richard Nisi and his loungewear range. So, as I mentioned earlier, you can see me from the waist up. So above the keyboard dressing is really important. And I think what we're starting to see is little details that are happening around the neck, you know, around collars or polo necks or jacket details, just so that there is this comfortability, but there's something that will allow us to be differentiated when we're looking at sort of keyboard dressing. Then, of course, what we're starting to see is, as I mentioned, the focus of the top body and what that means, which is soft knit polos, slouchy Oxford shirts, and relaxed tailoring. So these kinds of soft collars, nothing hard or rigid, even in terms of the fabrication. No one wants things that are going to sort of chafe and sort of irritate their skin. So I think this is also a highlight of us having to wear a mask continuously. We also don't want things that are going to irritate us. So it is really important when we look at the functionality of it beyond just the form and aesthetic. And then, of course, what we're also starting to see is this kind of resurgence of 90s minimalist. So I think there's a number of different things at play here. This is around minimalist sports aesthetics as well as silhouettes and cuts. But I think it's also around what we refer to in the trend world as the nostalgia pendulum. So what that means is every 30 years, those who grew up in a specific era have an emotional connection and a nostalgia towards that era. And what we do is, when we're in a disposable income space and we're working, what we really do is sell our own childhood back to us, which is really interesting because it gives us a feeling of nostalgia. It makes us feel good. It reminds us of being a kid and being free. And I think that that's something that needs to be taken into consideration each time we see a revival of a trend. We have to understand that, you know, it's the people that are now of an age with disposable income that are our consumers, and they want to buy something or a little bit of a piece of themselves back. It's a really interesting space to play in. So as a result of this, you know, when we look at the minimal sports aesthetic, the revenue in the South African men's apparel segments amounted to 3.933 million in 2020. And now we're seeing the market sort of incrementally grow kind of by 9.9% annually. And I think, you know, it's really starting to see how these trends are being articulated from both a global and local market, is that it's just, you know, it's that golden thread that I refer to when we speak about trends that ties kind of a universal consumer together. So again, I'm just going to make reference via video so you can also see the clothing in motion, because I think this is a really important facet around content, around fashion and clothing. We also want to see how it moves on the body, because that gives us an idea of how it's going to wear and the fluidity and the functionality of it. So then, I mean, these are sort of trends that are coming forward from a universal or global perspective. But I think what's really important to say, as someone that specializes in the globalization for Africa, I think there has been this sort of predetermined idea that when you're working with a predominantly Black consumer or people of color, that we tend to stereotype a Black consumer into only listening to hip hop and only wanting to wear sportswear or hip hop related styles. And what we're seeing really beautifully is the deconstruction of that here, that Black consumers or people of color can also consume rock music or punk, or I mean, when we see the sort of cult phenomenon of Afropunk and what that means and how it originated, I think what we're starting to see is our consumers being far more diverse and challenging the stereotypes of this. So when we look at modern Gothic, we almost associate it for Caucasian markets, but I think what we're starting to see even more so are Black consumers playing in that space and living these kinds of lifestyles of deconstructivism, so the homage to the Yohji Yamamoto's and the deep, sort of these deconstructed ideas of, you are a Black consumer, you only listen to this music, you only go here on weekends, and this is what you do. Rather, we're removing those boundaries, and we're really starting to see how consumers are evolving and creating their own unique identity. So, of course, when we look at sort of conscious consumerism and the ideas and elements of the modern Gothic trend, what we're starting to see is this kind of conscious denim and similar materials that really are, even though they look sort of very, very elevated, that they also have that sort of space of sustainability in mind. So when I'm speaking about the modern Gothic, which is my previous slide, and the idea of key colors for 2021 for menswear, what you're starting to see is quite a blurring of gender. And I think this is really something pertinent to take into consideration. And I think that's, something when I am presenting menswear and women's wear, I have to highlight that gender fluidity, androgyny, all of these kinds of trends that we have sort of kind of politely ignored as only trends are really starting to take quite a strong stance in terms of your consumers and what that means to them. And this kind of fluidity that your modern and younger consumers who were not brought up with these strong, staunch archetypes and how they're starting to play in these different spaces. When you look at young men like Harry Styles wearing nail polish, wearing bows, wearing elevated and heeled shoes, I think we're starting to see just the exploration of that in the formation of personal identity. Then, of course, neutrals and how this plays homage to nature, and not just what the clothing is made out of, but also what it looks like, and this newfound sort of love for these neutrals that sort of play and in the natural space and become an extension of that awareness. And then, as you know, we're all dealing with a lot. And I think that what this has led to is the idea of optimistic fashion and the necessity to feel happy and expressive and just enjoy life. And I think that our consumers are wanting to feel positive. They're wanting to feel optimistic. And this is translating into color across women's wear and menswear, and even in interior design. So what we're starting to see is that this playfulness has really come about, and the colors for Spring Summer 2021 really are bold and really emblazoned with this kind of, it's a color that just makes you smile. And I think that's something really important to take into consideration. Then as a result of these kinds of throwbacks, and also the DIY culture, a lot of us have been DIYing at home and just exploring how we can spend our time. This is translated into the resurgence of tie-dye. And this is something that we're seeing, you know, just in fast and affordable retail spaces, but also on high-end runways. And I think this is also kind of a nuance to the 1970s and that kind of sort of hippie-esque, the idea of, you know, becoming more aware of different cultures and how this gives a form of personal expression. So anything from splatters to dyes, all of these kinds of trends, we're starting to see cross-board. And then sort of around the bold colors, we're also seeing really, really bold prints. And I think what's really awesome is that we're veering away from the stereotypes. And you'll see here in the Katakane, Moreku, and the Richard Nisi pieces, which are African, how they're staying away from the stereotypical African predetermined aesthetic. They are creating their own prints that represent them as Africans. And it's not this kind of predetermined print that was given to us from outside of Africa. What we're starting to see is African designers playing with print, but redefining what African print is. So for us, it's a very, very exciting space. And this is really born out of inaccessibility to fabrication in Africa. We don't have the same sort of supplies and resources that we do, that other continents and countries have. So what we're starting to see is our designers being incredibly innovative in creating things themselves. And I think this is a beautiful space to watch if you are in manufacturing of print and pattern and design. I think Africa is definitely a space to watch on how they form their own fabrications from a contemporary perspective. Then, of course, coordination, this kind of matchy-matchy trend, or even the idea of pattern clashing with two-piece items. I think we're seeing this across the board, even from sort of cultural phenomena like Justin Bieber. We're starting to see these coming into play, and there's a whimsy about it. And I think this is also around the versatility of these items. You can wear it together, you can wear it separately, and how you can play with just two items and get a lot of functionality out of that. Then, of course, you know, the idea of a black leather jacket, I think that's a sort of go-to in both male and female categories. But what we're also starting to see is the sustainability aspect, where it's repurposing leather. It's already got that worn softness. And I think this is going to be a really exciting space for leather goods, is how we see the sustainability angle and the repurposing of fabrications, and how we're seeing that going into retail spaces or going onto runway, and what this means for our consumer. And then, of course, there is kind of a resurgence of this kind of English as well as nuance to rugby and those rugby playing countries. Rugby jerseys from streetwear to cross the board has just taken an elevated level. When you look at Kent and Kerwin, which is a David Beckham associated brand, where it's got beautiful emblazoned embroidery, but also just a basic rugby jersey, which we really it can really fit the summer landscape for those cooler evenings. Then, of course, the functionality aspect coming through in pockets, pockets, and more pockets, as well as the revival of the sort of 90s cargo and how this is sort of playing around that. And I think it is around functionality and those kinds of details that consumers are looking at to give it a little bit more of a multifaceted approach. So I think for me, that's all I'm throwing at you today from a menswear perspective. I hope you found some things of value, not only in looking at print and pattern and colors, but also looking at your global consumer and what that means to them and how they are evolving. So I'd just like to extend thank you again to Neil and All Fashion Sourcing, as well as the gents that are behind the scene making this happen digitally. I think that we're starting to see a new world and adaptability, and I really thank them for being a part of this process and bringing me to you. Thank you.
Nicola, thank you very, very much. That was really good. And I think you're 100% right. I think adaptability is our new normal.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
which is exciting. You know, it's like, you know, it's something that I've been driving with most of my clients, is that our consumers are also just so overwhelmed, you know, and if we just lessen the admin for them, and that means consumers even of your business, is like if we make it easier for them, there is sort of a loyalty that comes if someone offers a consumer something that can help them save time. Like, it's a big deal. You know what I mean? If it just makes a little bit of ease in someone's life, it's a big deal. Yeah.
No, you're 100% right. Just on behalf of All Fashion Sourcing, thank you very much for joining us. And please join us for our next session. All Fashion Sourcing 2020. We're going virtual this year, and so far, so good. Thank you.
Thank you.